Good evening and a very warm welcome to this week's Out and About. Over the course of the pandemic, everyone's finances have been affected in some way. And as we mentioned on the programme a few weeks back, we'll be bringing you some tips and advice on how you can better manage your money and your assets. Over the coming next few shows, we'll be joined by financial advisor Bhupinder Anand, who joins us today to talk to us more about making a will. Bhupinder, it's great to see you. We've heard a lot from our viewers about getting some advice, particularly when it comes to their finances. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be covering various subjects, but this week, let's talk about the W word, wills.
Wills.
It's a word that we've probably all heard of. Not many people will know really what a will is. So I guess to begin with, just explain to our viewers exactly what a will is.
Okay, a will is one of the most important documents you could ever produce, ever be involved in. Before I go on to what it is and how it might work, I think there's some misnomers that we must cover. And one of the big things I find in our community is, oh, I don't want to talk about a will because it means in talking about a will, I'm talking about death.
Right.
And in talking about death, that's an Asian thing, is if I talk about it, it somehow brings it closer. Vishal, I have not yet seen any scientific evidence of that.
To prove that,
To prove that. So let's get over that. It's something I have a philosophy that we're all leaving the planet one day, ignoring reincarnation for a moment, but we're all leaving the planet one day.
Right.
The choice is not when do we leave, it's how do we leave it. Do we leave it in good financial order, or do we leave a financial mess? And that to me is a choice. So doing nothing is a choice of saying, I want to leave a financial mess.
Right.
So the purpose of a will primarily, I'd say there's two main reasons. First of all, and this is really important, again, people don't understand this. If you have young children, i.e. under the age of 18, you need to appoint guardians. If you don't have a will that appoints guardians, the simple question is, if both parents were to pass away, God forbid, in a car accident together, who's going to look after your children?
Right, of course.
And people think, oh, my brother, my sister, my parents, whoever might be. Reality, you run the risk of social services coming along and taking the children away until somebody turns up to say, I'm the one that's going to look after them. And then they're going to get vetted. Can they afford to look after these kids? Do they physically have the ability to look after their kids? And of course, social services are terrified that would these people abuse the children. Have a will to appoint a guardian, even if you've got no money and you've got no assets. It's not about tax or anything else. For young families, a will is to appoint guardians. Then we go on to, what if I've got assets?
Right.
And choice, I use that word quite a bit. If you have no choice because you chose not to write a will, what you're really saying is, I trust the state, I trust the government, whichever colour that government is, to look after my affairs and to divide it up between whoever they see fit. Now that's called dying intestate.
Okay.
So if you die without a will, the laws of intestacy come along. And the laws of intestacy, you may think everything goes to spouse. Not necessarily.
Right, so that's quite a big misconception there.
Yeah, absolutely, not necessarily. You look it up, there's a flow chart of rules, and it depends. If you don't have any children, yes, it would all go to spouse. But if you do have children, only a certain amount goes to the spouse, and the balance is shared between spouse and children.
Okay.
Now, you may think that's not a problem, but then it introduces another aspect of end-of-life planning, is tax.
Yes.
Inheritance tax. And so by not having a will, you run the risk, not only of your assets not going where you would want them to go to, of your children ending up where you don't want them to be, but also the tax man coming along and saying, give me 40%.
Right.
So a will is a really important document that every single person should be engaging with.
So for example, I think you've laid that out quite clearly there. You know, that's a really, really good way to protect your children and their future. If you don't have children, why is it still so important that you have a will?
It's less important, shall we say. Right, first of all, because it will automatically go to spouse, whatever your assets are. But then we might get on to what you might do better with a will. which I know we're going to have a series of these, Vishal, so I'm not going to go too deep at this one, and people are going to start turning off if I get too heavy. But what a decent will do is take account of the 3-letter word of tax. I'll give you a good example of what a decent will might do. So if you've got a couple with a property portfolio, and this is real, by the way, I've literally last week had a client with this story. That's why I can tell it fresh.
Okay.
Husband died. Happens. The property portfolio is bringing in £100,000 of income. The number's not important, except it is valid in this particular story. So husband and wife, 50,000 each, and they were both basic rate taxpayers. And as a result of that, they didn't pay more than 20% tax. Husband died, did not have a will. Wife gets all the property, and you may think that's okay.
Sure.
Wife's got all the property. Problem, she's also got all the income.
Right.
Now with all of that income, which she doesn't need, she's now a 100,000 earner.
Tax.
And that extra 50, instead of being taxed at 20%, which it was when her husband was alive, is now taxed at 40%.
Wow.
And I'm going to put to you, people that are viewing this have not thought about that. Okay, that simple angle of what happens when one person goes and everything moves to the other person. Now, what a good will would do, the kind of wills that I write, not solicitors, because solicitors don't understand tax, big statement, but generally true, is that you should appoint a trust under the will. So if husband had had a will that pointed to a trust, the will would have sent his share of properties to the trust. That means the income belongs to the trust. That means the spouse, the widow, is not getting taxed on all that income, but if she wants it, she can have it and get taxed on it. But now, that income could go to her children.
Right.
Or even grandchildren, and use their tax allowances. Here's something else that people won't know.
So children have tax allowances?
Children have tax allowances. Right. So one of the phrases I talk to when I'm talking to new clients is, can you remember your children's first words? Can they say, oh, mama, papa, right? I said, no. Your kid's first words were, where's my tax allowance?
Right.
Okay. And when you said, no, they haven't got one, that's when they started crying.
Yes.
Okay. So here's the reality. Kids from the second they are born have a personal allowance. They can earn £12,500 a year, free of all taxes.
Right, okay.
People think that allowance only comes in at 16 or 18. No.
When they're an adult, but that's not the case.
It's not the case.
Right, okay.
So first of all, people don't know that. Second, if they do know that, they don't know how to give them that income.
Yes.
Because if a parent gives their income to a child, that doesn't work. It's still taxed on the parent. But if that parent's died and left the money in a trust that gives it to a child, and getting complicated, and bear with me, then it is the child's income.
Right. Okay.
Who can now pay their own school fees, tuition, schools, clothing, toys. Whatever the parent pays from taxed income can now be tax-free. Vishal, this is how wealthy people stay wealthy.
Of course.
By understanding the law.
Yes.
Understanding the opportunities, and not just thinking, I'll buy a £20 will, because you can.
Yes.
Right? But you won't get all of that structure.
Yeah.
So powerful tax planning is part of good will planning. It's a good question to ask of anybody that's writing your will. Are they insured? Because if it goes wrong and you need to go after them, or your estate needs to go after them,
someone needs to be liable.
Someone
for
needs
that.
to be responsible for it.
We've talked a lot about how we can make this happen. We've talked about the importance of having a good will as well. Plain and simple, what is a good will?
Well, a good will should be very clear about your intentions. And so a good will, first of all, should have clarity of what you want, clarity of end of life. Do you have any wishes? You know, cremation, burial, whichever it is, what do you want to happen? My wills don't send things to human beings, because if you do, you leave those things at risk. Instead, send them to trusts. In another session, we'll talk about how trusts work, but the easiest way of imagining it is a shoebox.
Okay.
Okay?
A storage facility.
A storage facility, you open the box on death. It's not open until then. So we're not talking about giving away during lifetime. But on death, the will says, open the lid of that box and whatever I've got, put it in there.
You've got that, right.
Close the lid, and you appoint a trustee to manage that box.
Okay. So Bhupinder, lots of really, really good advice, and actually I'm sure has been a huge eye-opener for all of our viewers watching this. A lot of information to take in there. How can we summarise that in a nutshell? What advice would you give to our viewers as to why it really is so important that they have a will?
Well, I hope that wasn't too deep and too heavy for everybody. My role here is to open your eyes and ears to opportunities of planning, rather than just saying, here's a will, go and buy one. Just think broader than that. So the first thing I'm going to say is don't ignore the subject, because ignoring the subject is saying that you are choosing to leave a mess. Okay, don't make that choice, make a wise choice, number one. Number two, seek out good advice, which is not just legal advice, but about tax and financial planning as well. You've got to bring all of those aspects together. Think carefully about who you want your estate to go to. How much does each person deserve to get? They don't have to be treated equally. And any specific wishes that you might have. Spend some decent funds, get some decent advice, make sure your legacy is a legacy for generations to come.
Thank you very much for your advice, Bhupinder, and there'll be more advice coming in the next few weeks. Time to take a very short break, but when we come back, we're joined by a brand new chef in more of your favourite cooking segments. We'll see you again in part 2.